Okay, so have you ever like totally embarrassed yourself in public? Like that time I spilled my entire drink all over myself at a party.
Yeah.
I felt like the whole room was just staring at me,
Yeah.
judging my clumsiness.
Oh, yeah. I've been there.
But thinking back, I bet most people didn't even notice or they forgot about it 2 seconds later.
Right. Probably.
Turns out that's our brains playing tricks on us.
Oh, yeah.
It's something called the spotlight effect.
Yeah, the spotlight effect.
We tend to think that people are noticing us way more than they actually are, especially those embarrassing moments.
Yeah, we think we're under this microscope
Right.
all the time.
So yeah, get ready because in this deep dive, we are going to unpack the spotlight effect. We've got a whole bunch of research to go through, and we're going to look at how the spotlight effect works, why it matters, and most importantly, some tactics to kind of manage it and maybe free ourselves from that spotlight a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting how our brains can just convince us that we're constantly being watched, like we're the star of the show and everyone else is just an extra.
Yeah, and it makes sense in a way, right? We're
Yeah,
so aware of our own experiences, so it feels natural to assume that everyone else is just as focused on them too.
right. You're the main character in your own story, so to speak.
Exactly. But research shows that this spotlight isn't always shining as brightly as we think. Like, there's this great example I read about this mismatched socks study where they had people wear, mismatched socks.
Oh, wow.
And they were convinced that everyone would notice their fashion faux pas.
Like, oh my God, look at that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But guess what? Most people didn't even notice. Or if they did, they didn't care.
I love that.
Yeah.
We think we're sticking out way more than we do.
Totally. So to understand why this happens, we have to go back to 1999. This is when psychologists Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Husted Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky coined the term spotlight effect.
Yeah, those are the big names.
The OGs.
The OGs of the spotlight effect.
And along with other researchers, they kind of figured out that we as humans tend to overestimate how much attention other people are paying to us.
Yeah. And it's not just about embarrassing moments either. It's
Yeah.
like everything, we think our contributions stand out more, our opinions are more unique, our flaws are more obvious. Like it's this overall inflated sense of self-importance in a way.
So it really does affect a lot of areas of our lives.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how this research kind of builds on some earlier work by Gilovich and others.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were already looking at, how we perceive ourselves in social situations.
Hmm.
So this spotlight effect was kind of like the next step in understanding those dynamics.
So how did they even figure all of this out?
Well, they did some pretty clever experiments. Like one of those famous ones involved having people wear this T-shirt
Okay.
with a picture on it that they found embarrassing,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had to walk into a room full of other people.
Oof. That sounds...
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, these participants were like mortified. They were certain that everyone was staring at them and judging them.
Mm.
But the results were really surprising.
I bet.
Yeah. Only a tiny fraction of the people in the room actually noticed the T-shirt, let alone remembered it later.
Wow. That is fascinating.
Yeah, it's like this huge reality check, right?
Yeah.
Like even when we feel like we're sticking out like a sore thumb, we probably aren't.
So why does our brain do this to us? Why do we think we're under this giant spotlight all the time?
Well, it has to do with something called anchoring. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of it. But maybe you can explain it for our listener.
Absolutely. So basically, we get so fixated on our own intense feelings. Like say you spill that drink you were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
that mortification you feel,
Yeah.
it becomes your anchor, and you just assume that everyone else is experiencing it just as strongly.
So we project our inner world outward.
Exactly. Like if I'm super anxious about something, I assume everyone else can sense that anxiety and is
Mhm.
judging me for it.
Oh, that makes sense.
But the truth is, most people are so caught up in their own heads, they barely even notice.
So like if I'm running late for a meeting,
Yeah, classic example.
I always picture everyone staring at me, judging my every move. Is that anchoring in action?
Exactly. That's it. That anxiety about being late, it becomes your anchor, and you project it onto the whole room, assuming everyone is scrutinizing your every move.
It's like we overestimate our significance in those situations.
Right. We think we're way more important than we actually are.
So is this anchoring idea, is it connected to other like mental quirks too? Are there other ways our perceptions might be a little off?
Oh, absolutely. The spotlight effect is just one piece of the puzzle. There are other related phenomena that all kind of play into this idea that our perceptions aren't always accurate.
Okay, give me some examples.
Well, there's the false consensus effect, which is where we overestimate how much people agree with our opinions.
So like everyone loves my favorite band.
Yeah, exactly. Or everyone thinks pineapple on pizza is the best.
Right, right. Okay, what else?
And then there's the illusion of transparency, which is where we think our inner world is like an open book and everyone can see what we're thinking and feeling.
So everyone knows I'm nervous.
Exactly. Even if you're trying to hide it.
Mm.
And then there's the self as target bias, which is the tendency to think that random events are somehow directed at us.
So, like, if I trip and fall, I assume everyone is laughing at me.
Yeah, or if you're having a bad day and it starts raining, you think the universe is personally against you.
Wow. So basically, our brains are kind of wired to make us feel like we're the center of attention.
Yeah, in a way. And while that might be helpful for survival in some situations, it can also lead to a lot of unnecessary anxiety and self-consciousness.
So it's not just me who thinks everyone in a fitness class is judging my every move.
Oh, no, not at all. You are definitely not alone in that. It's such a common experience.
It's actually kind of comforting to know that other people are dealing with the same anxieties.
Right. It normalizes it a bit,
Nah.
takes away some of the shame.
Yeah. So we've established that this spotlight effect is a real thing, and it affects pretty much everyone. But what's the big deal? Why should we even care about this?
Well, because these biases, they aren't just these interesting quirks of our brains. They have real consequences.
Mm.
They can affect our self-esteem, our relationships, our decisions, and even our overall well-being.
Okay, that sounds pretty serious. So how does it actually play out? Like, what are the consequences of constantly feeling like we're under a microscope?
Well, think about it. If you're always worried about what other people are thinking,
Mm.
you're less likely to take risks, to speak your mind, to pursue your passions, because you're so afraid of being judged or rejected.
So it can really hold us back.
Exactly. It keeps us playing small and staying in our comfort zones.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about what the spotlight effect is and why it matters, but the big question is, what can we do about it? Are we doomed to feel self-conscious forever? Or is there a way to break free from this mental spotlight?
I wouldn't say doomed. Not at all. There are definitely things we can do to manage this spotlight effect and, start feeling more confident.
Okay, so what can we do? Spill the beans.
Okay, well, one strategy that I find really helpful is to shift your perspective. Remember that everyone else is busy with their own lives, their own worries, their own insecurities.
Right. I guess we forget that sometimes.
Yeah, it's easy to get so caught up in our own heads that we forget that other people aren't really thinking about us as much as we think they are.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how do we actually put that into practice?
Well, one thing you can try is like a little experiment next time you're feeling really self-conscious about something.
Okay.
Ask a friend if they notice the thing you're worried about.
Oh, so like fact-checking our anxieties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And chances are they didn't even notice. Or if they did, it wasn't a big deal to them.
I like that. I'm going to try that. But what if that doesn't work? What if those thoughts keep coming back?
Well, that's where self-compassion comes in. It's so important to treat ourselves with the same kindness that we would offer a friend. Everyone makes mistakes. It's part of being human. So instead of beating yourself up for every little slip up, try practicing self-forgiveness.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But isn't some self-critique healthy? Like, how do we balance self-compassion with the need to actually grow and learn from our mistakes?
That's a great question. And you're right, it's not about letting ourselves off the hook entirely. It's more about finding that balance,
Yeah.
between holding ourselves accountable while also recognizing that we're all works in progress and that beating ourselves up doesn't actually help us improve.
Yeah, it's more about like encouraging ourselves instead of being our own worst critic.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got perspective shift, we've got self-compassion. What else? What other tools can we use to combat this spotlight effect?
Well, humor is a powerful one. Learning to laugh at ourselves can really take the sting out of those embarrassing moments. It's like saying, yeah, I messed that up, but it's not the end of the world.
So not taking ourselves too seriously?
Exactly. And then finally, one of the best ways to overcome the spotlight effect is to gradually step outside of your comfort zone.
Okay, so like facing our fears,
Yeah,
but in a manageable way.
exactly. Think of it like building a muscle.
Mm.
If you're terrified of public speaking, start by speaking up in smaller groups. If you're worried about what people think of your style, try wearing something a little bolder. Each time you push yourself a little bit, you gain more confidence, and you realize that the world doesn't end if you make a mistake or stand out a little bit.
I like that analogy. Okay, so we shift our perspective. We practice self-compassion, we add in a little bit of humor, and we gradually challenge ourselves. But can we make this even more concrete? Like, what are some real-world situations where this spotlight effect might pop up? And how can we actually apply these strategies?
Sure. Let's start with a classic one. Giving your presentation at work. You're standing up there in front of all these people. You're nervous. You're feeling like everyone's judging your every word and movement. What's your gut reaction in that situation?
Oh, man. Public speaking is definitely a trigger for me. I immediately start thinking about all the ways I could mess up, how everyone's going to see how nervous I am. It's not pretty.
Yeah, I feel that.
Hmm.
But in those moments, try to remember that most people in the audience actually want you to succeed. They're there to learn something from you. And if you stumble over a word or two, just keep going. It's likely that no one even noticed.
You're probably right. We tend to assume the worst. But most people are actually pretty supportive.
Exactly. And this applies to so many other situations too, like fitness classes, for example.
Hmm.
A lot of people avoid going to fitness classes because they're so worried about being judged for their skill level or their fitness level.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been there. I always feel like everyone's watching me struggle through those burpees, wondering why I'm so out of shape.
But the truth is, everyone else in that class is focused on their own workout. They're not there to judge you. So try shifting your attention to your own body, your own goals. You'll probably find that those feelings of self-consciousness start to fade away.
It's like we're giving ourselves permission to just be present in the moment rather than worrying about what everyone else is thinking. This is really helpful. Okay, so we've covered presentations and fitness classes, but there's one more scenario I want to tackle. Social media. I feel like social media is like a breeding ground for the spotlight effect, where everyone is showcasing their perfect, curated lives.
Yeah, it's like everyone's constantly performing, trying to project this like perfect image. And it's so easy to get caught in that comparison trap, feeling like we don't measure up.
Yeah, social media definitely amps up that spotlight effect. It makes us so aware of how we're being perceived by others, even if those others are just like a bunch of profile pictures.
Right. It's not even real people sometimes. It's just this idea of an audience.
Yeah, exactly. But it's important to remember that what you see online is often just a carefully constructed highlight reel. It's
Yeah.
not the full picture. People tend to share their successes, not their struggles.
That's so true. We're all just seeing the best versions of each other. Yeah. And it's easy to forget that everyone is dealing with their own stuff behind those perfectly filtered photos.
So how do we navigate this whole digital landscape without falling prey to the spotlight effect?
Well, I think it starts with using social media mindfully. You know, be selective about who you follow and what content you consume.
So like if a certain account makes you feel bad.
Yeah. Unfollow them. Mute them.
Yeah.
Don't engage with that content. And remember, you don't have to present a perfect version of yourself online.
Yeah, it's okay to be real.
Exactly. It's okay to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
to share your authentic self, even the messy parts.
I think that's a good reminder for all of us. So it's about focusing on genuine connection rather than just racking up likes.
Exactly. Shift your focus from external validation to internal satisfaction. Share things that bring you joy. Connect with people who uplift you. And remember that true self-worth comes from within, not from the number of followers you have.
Love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've learned about the science behind the spotlight effect, its real-world implications, and even some practical strategies for managing it. What's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the spotlight isn't always shining as brightly as you think. Your brain might try to convince you that you're constantly being watched and judged, but in reality, most people are too wrapped up in their own lives to pay that much attention to you.
It's actually kind of freeing when you think about
It
it.
is. It really is.
Yeah.
As you become more aware of the spotlight effect, you can start to challenge those anxious thoughts, practice self-compassion, and ultimately step out of that perceived spotlight and into your own authentic light.
I love that imagery. Okay, so to wrap things up, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. Think back to a time when you felt intensely self-conscious, like everyone was watching your every move. Now imagine someone else in that exact same situation. How much attention would you have paid to them?
That's such a good question.
Honestly, I probably wouldn't have even noticed.
Right.
It's funny how our perspective changes when we're not the ones in the spotlight.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of understanding the spotlight effect.
Hmm.
As we become more aware of this cognitive bias, we can start to live more freely, embrace our imperfections, and focus on the things that truly matter to us.
So to all our listeners out there, the next time you feel that spotlight shining a little too brightly, remember it's probably just a trick of the mind. Embrace your authentic self, shine your own unique light, and enjoy the freedom that comes from knowing that you are enough just as you are.